Hey everybody, it's Mark J. Ryan and welcome to the Mark J. Ryan Experience. Today, I've got another great guest for you. We had Dr. John Burton last week and John Overdurf the week before that. And the third guest, who I've had just hours and hours of conversation with, and I've learned so much about business and the corporate world and NLP in general and systems. And his name is Michael Cahill. And he is a genius, in my opinion. Good friend, wonderful human being. I met Michael years ago, I think 2011, 2012, in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he was assisting with myself for John Overdurf at a trainer's training that John has every year in the summertime, where he gets people coming in from all over the world that are already pretty well professional speakers or do some kind of training and they want to take their game to the next level. So Michael is really just fantastic with details, and I have a tendency to go with more obscure things. And so the two of us really play well, in my opinion, and I think John's opinion, because he asks us back every year. We're hoping to go again this summertime. Anyways, I would talk to Michael about different things, and he had written a book. I knew that from the Financial Times business newspaper had hired him to write a book, making the right investment decisions. And so different people would come in. He'd bring so many of them with him. People say, "Oh, can I get your book?" Or, "Oh, I got your book," because they knew he was going to be there. And I'm like, I've got to find out more about this guy. We would just have incredible conversations late night, like when the class was over. John would make up a nice meal. We'd get the meal. We'd get together. We'd have some conversations, and then on uh, last time we were in Scottsdale, Michael and I said, "Can I record?" Because and I got like 13 hours of recording. Incredible. Where we just, when we went out to eat, I'd stick the recorder on. When we had somebody else we wanted to bring with us. But I learned a lot about business. What I started to find out was like, wow, this guy really knows business. And what I knew he had done was, evaluations to make decisions on how much a company might be worth to buy. And so last year, after many years, because again, we'd have just great conversations, I asked John, I said, who did Michael used to work for? What was he really doing? He goes, I know about as much as you, and I really don't know. And so then I asked him, and I said, Michael, I said, who did you work for? What did you do? Anyways, the conversation got pretty deep. And to find out who he worked for, I mean, and who would hire him, and who would hire him to say, hey, shall we buy this $100 million company or this big company? Is it big numbers? It was Michael. And sometimes they would send a team of 20 people over to the UK, to London, to train managers, to train with Michael, say, try to figure out what he's doing, because he can really evaluate companies brilliantly. And so the names, John and I just kind of were like, wow, we had no idea that you were working at this level. So what I talked to Michael about in this interview that's coming up, I've already recorded it with him, and I kind of given you a little bit of a framework on how to listen to this with him, and it might be helpful to listen to it this way. We're going to talk a lot about business. Don't let that dissuade you from listening to this. If you're in business, you're going to love it. If you're a small business, large business, you're going to love what you're going to learn in this kind. If you're not into business, just listen, because he's a systems guy. He takes systems of how we work with ourselves, because he does personal coaching. He does systems coaching with businesses in organizations. He does family coaching stuff, but how systems work and interact together. And he's got a really unique angle on it and done some of the best training in the world. So here's a guy that's way up high in the corporate world, in the banking world, that does evaluations with businesses, but then came down and started listening at a different level to NLP, to hypnosis, to systems, to enneagrams, different things, and looked at different models of the world and has integrated them in his own style and his own way of training. So his conversations come from many different places, but to get that up high look from being way up in the banking system and understanding how it works, he's got a unique view to know what's missing up there, why we're all having so much trouble. And in this time of chaos and uncertainty that we're talking about, that I talked about with Dr. John Burton and John Overdurf, Michael's going to bring a different perspective of how we might be able to take that knowledge of what we've learned to help individuals, to help systems, to go into businesses, small or large, and to help them to find out what's going on, what's different, what are they not seeing, that we can then help them integrate to get better, to where they start to get recognized at the C-suite in higher levels, say, what are they doing different? How can we integrate that? Well, this crisis has really forced this on a lot of people to slow down and stop into where people to say, wow. And as Michael and I talk about in the call is how can this be an opportunity, whether you're in a small business, a medium-sized business, or you work for yourself, or you want to start a business, or even if you're just in a family or you're in business, how you can better learn to do things to integrate with systems to make systems work good to go forward to help you in all different areas. It's just, we went all over the place, but stayed on that path of how does this affect the system? How can we take advantage? How can you take advantage right now of this downtime that you have to work on yourself, to work on your systems and your families to say, what parts of your brain haven't you maybe used as much before? Or if you're coming from a fear state, what that does in your body, into your brain, and then how to shift over more into your right hemisphere, your creative mind, and how to use that, and how we all can begin to use that in our personal lives to enjoy better systems, to enjoy your life better. That's what this podcast is all about. How do you enjoy life better? How do you become and find out more of who you are? And then how to integrate and work within the system that you're in. You got to find out about the system that you're in, and that's what we're going to do with Michael. He's going to come from a business perspective, and in the beginning it can get a little bit thick, but then it starts becoming easier and it'll all start to flow, and you go like, I get what they're talking about. So it helps you understand who you are in yourself, who you are with your relationship with your partner, if you're married, with your kids, if you have a family, your greater family, the people you work with, your friends, how this all works together. And it's really it's like one system that just goes on different levels, but it's the same types of system to how to best use the system for yourself individually and in all those other situations expanding outward. It's it's a really interesting conversation that we have. And stay tuned till the end because I ask him some questions about how can you apply this to a smaller business. It doesn't matter, single person business, 5 people, 10 people, 20, 50 people. And he brings that system back down. So we kind of go all the way out, the system into the world, and then bring it back down into yourself and to the systems around you in small businesses. I hope you enjoy this. I'd love to hear back from you. Michael said he'd like to hear some feedback from people. I said, if we get it, I'll sure let you know and send it to you directly. So let us know what you think. And if you like it, and you'd like to hear Michael on here again, I think we can get him on here again. These are some things that we talked about at the end. He said, I kind of wish we'd included these things. And I'm like, wow, that's a whole nother podcast right there. So give us your feedback. Let's get Michael back on again. Enjoy this. Sit back and relax. Don't try to understand it all at once. We've kind of set it up that if you just listen to it, the penny will drop. You'll go, oh, you'll get an aha moment where it'll all kind of fit together. So enjoy the conversation. Let me hear back from you. Take care. This is Mark J. Ryan. Enjoy the interview. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. It's Mark J. Ryan, and I'm here with the Mark J. Ryan Experience. And today I got another great guest, good friend, long-term friend, met through John Overdurf in Scottsdale, Arizona, I think in 2012, Michael. Did we start in 2012 in Scottsdale?
2011.
2011. And then we went to Madison, Georgia, where we've been doing some trainers training there. Still wondering if we're going to do it this year. But anyways, Michael's a great friend. And as I said with John Burton last week, he's one of the few people that I've actually taken advice and done some coaching with. And Michael's the third person, Overdurf, Burton, Cahill. Cahill. Say it again. Say your name for me, please.
Cahill.
Cahill. So here he is, Michael Cahill, author of a great book as well, written from the Financial Times, Making the Right Investment Decisions. Is that right, Michael? Is that reading correctly across? It's not reversed?
That's correct.
It's okay. I did change my camera. Some of them come like that. So I'm happy to talk to Michael today. We would have some of the greatest conversations when we were doing trainers training in Scottsdale and then in Madison, Georgia. And Michael taught me so much about business and how business interacts. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today in systems and business, maybe some Enneagrams. Whenever I've had conversations with Michael, they're some of the best I've ever had. He's just brilliant man, and I think you're going to enjoy him a lot. And here he is. I'll let you introduce the road I've left out, Michael. And here he is, Michael Cahill.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, just by way of background, I spent 16 years in the City of London as an equity analyst, which basically means analysing companies to establish whether they're a good investment or not. And after 16 years, I decided that I was no longer enjoying it and wanted to do something else without having a clue what I was going to do. And I was too tired to take a decision. So I just gave myself a few months off. And then I ended up teaching finance, which I also enjoyed. And it's when I was teaching finance that I realized that I knew my content, having had 16 years experience looking at companies, analyzing companies, advising fund managers on whether to invest or not. That it's one thing knowing your content, it's a very different thing having the capacity to deliver and share that content in a way people can get it, understand it, and use it. And like many of the things we'll probably talk about, you realize when you're teaching something like, for example, finance, and I would do, equity valuation, corporate finance, how stock markets work, that type of thing, that more often than not, people have got a really good intuitive sense of this, but it's the jargon that puts them off. And so often when you're teaching things, you're teaching confidence rather than the content, because once people got confident with the content, they could, really make headways and progress with their job. So I discovered NLP as a way of making me a better trainer. And then that was the start of another journey through the NLP frame, culminating in trainers training with John and in 2007. And ever since, I've been deepening my sort of awareness and capacity as a trainer, but also as a coach, because coaching just emerged as something I really loved when studying coaching. And so I hope what I bring is an unusual combination of a sort of the hard content side in terms of investment and having worked in financial markets, but also the softer skills of coaching and thinking about systems and thinking about personal development, thinking about transformation, and just thinking about what are the points at which these intersect, where business could really do with more of this, if you like, right brain intervention. And so the book is, if you like, the demonstration that my left hemisphere understands this stuff, but then that frees us up to have a relationship, to actually talk about what's going on in a relationship sense. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a journey that's been progressively, if you like, from the left hemisphere in finance to the right hemisphere in terms of coaching, and particularly systemic coaching, where you're connecting with the field. It's very embodied as opposed to cognitive. And that, if you like, has been a key journey for me, and it's an ongoing journey, I suspect, for many of us who are head types, who we rely on our analysis and our capacity to analyze, and can leave out that important wisdom of the heart and the rest of the body. So pretty much what John was talking about on the previous, well, the two Johns on the previous session, just connecting that head, heart, and gut brain. How does that work in a business context really interests me, as well as working in an individual context. So there's a sort of, if you like, a summary of the evolution of
Michael.
and the work I now do, which is a sort of, as I say, a hybrid. Some of it will be straight strategy work, some of it will be coaching, and one-on-one coaching.
Yeah. Equity. One of the things that and John Overder and myself have known Michael, like I said, for many years. We've had conversations, and I kind of said to John once, I said, do you know exactly what Michael does and like who he was working for? And John's like, not really. So I remember last summer when we were in Madison, I was like, Michael, what did you do? Who did you work for? Well, it came to a whole different level, and we won't go into the company names, but they're some of the biggest names in the industries. And when big name corporations were looking to buy other businesses, tell me if I got this right, Michael, they would come to you for evaluation, and they would send sometimes teams of 20 managers for you to train to try to figure out what you were doing. So it was like, we think, okay, he's written a book and he deals with equities and corporations and figuring out how much a company's worth. But when we really heard the story last time, it just really impressed me because I was like, okay, the size of the companies that you were analyzing, if I'm saying this right,
Hmm.
and maybe you can, was huge, but the companies that were hiring you to do this analysis so they could buy companies was really impressive. So don't let him fool you, or don't be fooled by him saying he's just working with evaluating companies. He's evaluating companies, big companies. So that was something you did for 16 years. But then what happened after 16 years? Because that seemed like it was interesting. But what happened to you where you had reached a level of growth where you said, eh, or did you see something within those corporations? Because I remember we've had some great conversations about
Mm.
how you evaluate companies differently than most people evaluate them, because you know a little bit about how they're managing, how they're thinking, how they do certain things, how the systems in the organization work. That can tell you how long maybe that company is going to be in the red or the black, or if they're going to get better. And I don't know if I'm saying this right, so maybe you can explain a little bit of how this is. You're also
Sure.
good at that, telling me what I'm really asking you and then finishing the question. So
Well, I'll just say after 16 years, I think it's an environment where you're paid well, but you work incredibly hard and it's very intense. And I found after 16 years, I was no longer enjoying it. And I also felt that I had joined a company called Warburg's, which was very much a partnership culture, really, and which was much smaller, more collegiate. And I really enjoyed that environment. And I left UBS, which was just a larger company, larger business. And I think a lot of people working in large businesses will get it, that, it was more procedural, less relationship driven. And so you just have that kind of divergence in values. But I think, and that's no disrespect to any of the organizations I've worked in or for, I just was no longer enjoying it as much as I was. And I'd always promised myself, if you're working that hard and you're not enjoying it, then it's time to do something else. And I was fortunate enough to be in a position to do that. And I think that one of the key things I feel, and I feel that this is a real issue that characterizes many organizations now, and that is that everybody works too hard and thinks too little. And I felt that was happening to me. And I think the quality of thinking was deteriorating whilst the volume and effort of work had increased. And I think it's a real issue in organizations currently. And, it's one of those things when you look back, you don't know at the time, but when you look back, you realize it's just one of the best things that you've done because it allowed so many other opportunities to come. And you don't know that at the time. It's slightly frightening because you've given up a good salary, you've given up a career that has status. And yet it's that, again, well, a bit like the current situation, it's that uncertainty. And I genuinely had no idea. I was too tired to make a decision. So I had no idea what I was going to do. But I knew there would be something that would emerge and that would be fascinating and interesting to me. And I've always had a sense that it would revolve around working with people rather than spreadsheets. Because you get to that stage where you've done spreadsheets and you've asked lots of detailed questions about the spreadsheets and you're understanding the full, and it's just not, at some point, it's just not quite, or for me anyway, it wasn't quite enough. I wanted to be more, working with people. And that's why kind of through a process of just a process of elimination, figuring things out, I just felt the teaching and writing side of things was a direction of travel for me. And, and as I say, I've never really looked back. And I guess that there's then been the phase of teaching finance. And then I guess really in the last 10 years, teaching NLP, coaching, but also doing a combination of things. So maybe looking at and facilitating strategy workshops and things like that, where, my background may be relevant to the organization in terms of being able to comment on their share price or comment on how investors might be looking at them, as well as working on the strategy side. And also then, some of the softer skills around presentation skills or coaching skills, that, are really kind of a rich vein that comes from the worlds of NLP.
Well, I think that you know what you're saying is that that you have you had such a great experience evaluating companies and being in a big company that yourself, several big organizations that yourself, that then you have something to apply your learning from NLP and coaching. It starts to make sense from your world to see it that way, with the skill, again, the skill of looking at kind of say what makes them valuable. Is this company going to continue to be valuable? What kinds of decisions are the things that the people are making, and that inner system within it, how that works? So a lot of people will just look at the basic numbers, and you're looking at the soft skills within an organization to see how that produces those numbers. And it seems like to take that jump, and then to have, because it's so pat what you're doing, and then being able to shift it around and saying, let me just let this be for a while, and I'm positive something that you're gonna like is gonna emerge. To me, it's huge. How did you get that ability, or were you just so tired? Were you just so tired you just didn't care, and you just said, that's it, I'm doing it, and I trust that it's gonna emerge? Or did you actually have a belief system or part of the learnings of what you're doing that something will emerge from that?
At that stage, I wouldn't have been able to use that language, but I just had a sense that I should be doing something different, and I was very, very tired. So that's a very, very valid point. But the point you make, and this is probably the start of more of the content for people, really, I will say things about business, and I sincerely hope a number of you really strongly disagree with me, because that will mean that I'm perhaps challenging some of the views and beliefs that you hold dearly.
I
And
like that.
I'm very respectful of that. And at the same time, I think that often to grow, we have to leave old beliefs and old loyalties behind. And that's something that I've kind of experienced and learned. But so in a business context, you made the point about, looking at the numbers and the ratios. I think that's one of the challenges I think organizations have at the moment, is that in effect, they're often managing the metrics rather than managing the business. And what I mean by that is that they'll have a target. It might be for EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, just a jargon, you don't need to know that. But they may target something like EBITDA or revenue growth or earnings per share, or monthly sales or what have you. And just to kind of connect it back to the two previous presenters or your guests on these discussions, the left hemisphere hates uncertainty. And I think most organizations have drifted into their left hemisphere. Mm-hmm. And they may not be a drift, it may be a kind of stampede. But it's really interesting, isn't it? Is we always talk about head office. And it's interesting that head office then,
right? The actual
exactly,
left brain head office.
Exactly so. But of course, because the left hemisphere craves certainty and craves predictability, it will use targets to give an illusion of certainty. And so in my map of the world, in terms of how I'm thinking about things now, what tends to happen is that people then end up managing that target.
So can you give me some more on that? Because it's the idea that they have a target, but the target is just made up, right? Yeah. I mean, they probably have some evidence from past, but past is not a predictor of the future. So it's made up, but then they have confidence, it seems like, on something that's made up. And so they don't like uncertainty, but they're living by uncertainty big time. Almost it'll cause them to go off course. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Because they can't deal with the uncertainty, they have to find something that gives them certainty. And that's managing the target. So we have a sales target, and if we look at most of the big reputational scandals for corporates, it's often because they've been driving towards let's say a volumes target. Volkswagen wanting to be the biggest car manufacturer in the world, they really managed, the volumes, and they were really intent on achieving that. But in the meantime, you've got all of these cheating on the emission standards.
Yeah.
So what you've got is an organization that's kind of being driven by volumes and being driven by targets, and then missing this whole dimension of, if you like, what might be called the environmental, social, and governance aspect of investments. But basically they were cheating, and they were cheating on the emission standards. They were also, using, as I understand it, testing monkeys on some of the emissions and some of the gases and things like that, which has an unfortunate echo of their past, perhaps. So you start realizing, well, actually, what's going on at an organization like VW is they're still being guided by their founding energy, which has challenges, let's face it. And so what I'm inviting us to consider here is that the target blindsided them to a massive reputational issue, which has cost them, I don't know, is it $20 billion? I know the United States has imposed a massive fine, quite rightly, on them for the cheating as far as the emission standards are concerned. And it's a big, big hit on your brand value. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that actually what true leadership is trying to do is to actually look at things like the value of the brand. So management is looking at delivering on the performance, but true leadership, the leaders in the organization, are responsible for the purpose and meaning of the organization. So that's much longer term. It's much more protecting and preserving the values of the organization, because those of you familiar with NLP, or indeed familiar with business, will be aware that the key thing that values do is they allow you to streamline your decision making, because values are the basis for your decisions. What I'm trying to suggest that somewhere like, I'm not picking on VW, lots of organizations in the UK have done this, a lot of organizations in the United States have done this. The decision-making process is being distorted by the obsession with targets, rather than taking a decision from the values of the organization. Okay. And that's leading to a conflict. And as a result, you are going to threaten the reputational dimensions of the reputation of the organization if you deliberately pursue targets without having values to underpin your decision making. And all I'm trying to suggest in some of the work I do is, look, organizations need to be conscious of their decision making process. If you're going for the target, what are the risks of that?
This applies to everybody. And so can you maybe give us an example of somebody you work with, or something that that you could say, how would this apply to what VW did with the decision of not going by their values, and maybe by something from their past values, without reconsidering completely what today's values are, or should be, or could be, and how that affects each one of us?
I'll share a coaching example. I had a chemistry meeting with a guy. He was an extremely successful city person. He'd just been appointed a managing director within the business. And he obviously felt he should be really, really happy because he'd just been promoted, because he had been focused on this promotion for a long time. So if you like, that's the goal. His goal for a number of years had been promoted, and he'd worked incredibly hard to achieve this. And, in a way, so far, so good. But of course, having been promoted, he found that it didn't really mean that much to him. It just meant that he was working even harder, and he was traveling even more. And when I was having this chemistry meeting, I found that I don't know. I think a lot of the coaches watching will get this. It was just, he was a really great guy, but the conversation was unreal. It was very intellectual, and I just felt we needed to bring it back to a reality. I felt that my sense was that he was very values based and he was very relationship driven, but what was happening is that his work was becoming very transactional, and he wasn't enjoying it as a result. And that was just an intuitive thing. I just picked that up off him. And so I just said, and it's a very odd thing to sort of say out of context, but because he'd associated the value of success with being promoted, I just thought I would play around with what success means. And so I said, oh, well, I was reading the other day a chap called Robert Holden, whose work I like, and some of you may well know. And Robert has this saying that if your definition of success doesn't have love in it, get another definition.
That's powerful. I like that. So, and I've never heard you say that before. So that's new to me, and it's making me take pause for a second and think about that. If your values don't, please say that again. If your values don't have love in the definition,
if your definition of success doesn't have love in it, get another definition. And we're in a serious boardroom type setting in the City of London. It's it's a very serious meeting. He is a very strong individual. He's about 6'4". He's a big guy.
Oh, wow.
And he just burst into tears
in the midst of the meeting.
Yeah, and this is just a chemistry meeting, and I'm thinking, oh well, I may not have got this work, but at least the conversation can now be real.
I love it.
Because it's that thing, because suddenly now, because we know that tears are liquid love. So I know that what I've said to him really got through to him. I didn't know it was going to impact him that way. Of course I didn't. But somehow in the field, I knew that this needed to be said, and we needed to make the conversation real. And he apologized. I said, don't apologize, because we now can start talking about what matters.
Nice.
And so we suddenly are having a completely different conversation, which is about him. It's about his colleagues, how he wants to get on with his colleagues, how he wants to get on with his family, who he feels he's neglected because he's been going down the goal of promotion. And that's the danger, isn't it? Is I've got this target, and it's the opposite of peripheral vision. When you and John Burton were talking about peripheral vision, the goal setting, he's in foveal vision, and he's missing all of the values that are important to him in life. And so, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with goals, by the way, and I often get this pushback. I'm just saying that, for those of you with the NLP background, the importance, particularly if the left hemisphere is setting the goals, you really need to have an ecology check. In my experience, if the right hemisphere is setting the goals, or what one wants, or how one wants to be different from the right hemisphere, there's less need for an ecology check, because the right hemisphere is in tune with relationship anyway. So the right hemisphere, that is all about connection. It's all about relationship. It's about creativity. There's an abundant spirit. The left hemisphere tends to be much narrower in its focus, and it's not relationship driven. So if you feel the goal has come from the left hemisphere, we really do need an ecology check, because it's John's it's John's beyond goals model. People don't want the goal, they want the state that's attached to the goal. This, I think, is a brilliant insight. It's not mine, it's John's, and is relevant both for us personally, as you're picking up, Mark, as well as, wouldn't it be interesting to apply this in an organizational setting? What's the energy they want to be in? How do they want to be as an organization when they've navigated, let's say they've navigated coronavirus successfully? How would they be as a company? What values do they want to preserve during these difficult days?
Yeah.
And I think that, again, in the work, I think what can happen is the goals get set in a state of fear. And this links up with the previous two discussions as well. Because if you're in a state of fear, you're not thinking creatively. You can't be strategic, you can't be creative, you can't be innovative if you're running from the woolly mammoth. But what organizations are doing is they're announcing redundancy programs, restructuring, headcount reductions, etc. So they create a state of fear in the organization and then ask the employees to be more creative. Well, it ain't going to work.
Gotcha.
There is no point doing that. And, what's interesting, again, in a pure psychological frame, if you like, we move away from fear and we move towards love. That's what if we use the chemistry meeting I had with that guy as a sort of metaphor, if you will, is that, for whatever reason, moving him towards love, having love as part of his definition of success and him wanting to move towards that, creates a much more real relationship. But also, by the end of that meeting, he just had a much better sense of who he was and what state he wanted to cultivate to be a great leader. And when you come from a place of love, obviously with, the heart involved, the gut brain involved, the vagus nerve relaxed, how much more creative can you be? How much more connected can you be? And of course, when we talk about head office, of course, the head office can't take decisions around values because values are heart-based.
Yes.
Values are a feeling. And so organizations are showing themselves to have great difficulty, I think, with values because feeling and emotion is not really allowed in business. But what strikes me in the current situation, as in many organizations, many countries around the world, last Thursday evening, we had a round of applause at 8 p.m. for health workers, who are literally, and people who've retired as nurses and medical workers have rejoined our health service to help out with the crisis. They're literally moving towards the danger.
Yes. Yeah.
This is just an extraordinary demonstration of the fact that people aren't selfish, that people care about their fellow man and want to work when it's nurturing and supporting others. But it was just such an extraordinary moment because, I live in a southeast, out into our garden and started applauding, and the whole area was clapping.
Nice.
And it was just really, really touching. And I think, that the fact that we can celebrate and commemorate these people, and these people in the UK, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, I suspect it may not be different. These people aren't necessarily paid what they deserve to be paid.
I agree.
They're just doing it because they have a vocation to do it, they're good at doing it, and what have you. But the kindness that they're showing, and indeed, if you like, in this language, the love that they're showing, these are things that organizations find very difficult to talk about.
Yes.
How many organizations, when you look at their values, talk about love or kindness as a value?
Yeah.
Yet at the human level, we are really responding to kindness at the moment. And it's just such a fantastic value. However, the left hemisphere taking decisions says, well, we've got to let 3,000 people go, or we've just got to survive. So again, it's getting into that state of decision making. What state do you want to be taking the decision from? And if you're setting targets and goals from that we're taking decisions and setting goals from a state of fear and a desire to want to hit the target. Now, in the current environment, there's so much uncertainty, there's no demand, you're not going to hit targets at all.
So it's an opportunity, really. We're in a really, really nice opportunity to stop and to pause and possibly companies taking on these things. They have a chance to start afresh, in a sense, to say, hey, what if we implemented it to restart because of this everything that's happening with the healthcare workers, people working together and everything, to say, hey, what if we're now saying we want to continue that spirit in our company and bring that spirit into our value system. They could start and start making decisions from that value system. Now you've flipped it all upside down. You've completely turned it around. I don't know if that's too big of an ambitious goal to go after, but I see it as a really, and that was one of the big things bringing you out of the show, was to say, I don't know how far this is going to go or how many people will get this, but everything you've been talking to me about, we've been talking about for 9 years. This is it. This is it right now. And it's almost like God came down and said, okay, I'm going to stop the world for a minute, implement this thing, put this software into the hardware of the corporation, literally software, soft skills, bring it in there, that we can then start to make decisions with both. I mean, I heard years ago of somebody said a job is something that somebody pays you not to do what you'd normally do during the day. So and I'm thinking, okay, a job is something that they're paying me to do during the day. It's like, no, they're actually paying you not to do what you want to do during the day. And I'm just like, wow. But what I'm getting from what you just said a little bit ago, especially with the gentleman in the boardroom, is they're not just paying you not to do, they're paying you not to be who you are during the day.
Yeah, and that's a great way of doing it. Forgive me, of saying it, because what would that person I was coaching, or indeed any of us, what would we be, how much more effective might we be if we showed up fully as ourselves? There's a great story from Tom Peters, the US management consultant, and he talks about a brief that he was given where the company had clearly decided that the workforce weren't creative enough. So it's a good right brain activity, being creative. And so he thought, okay, let's see what's going on here. So he starts talking to key people in the workforce and just says, what do you do when you're not at work? And he said, people worked for amateur dramatic companies painting stage scenery. Some people directed amateur opera. Some people were musicians, and would do gigs in the evening. Some people were watercolorists. He said it was astonishing that there was just all of this creativity that as soon as they crossed the door of the office, they left at home. And so what his advice to the board, and I think this is truly brilliant in terms of context we're talking about, he just said to the board, he said, you haven't got a problem with creativity. Your people are incredibly creative. Yeah. They're only not creative when they're with you.
That's a great story.
But again, but it's true, isn't it? It's that sense of, why can't we be all of who we want to be in a working environment? And again, jobs have to get done, tasks have to get done, targets have to be reached. I get all of that. But I think if you're having a lot more fun and if you're valuing the people, because I think what was just wonderful about that applause for the health workers last Thursday is, in our own little way, we are trying to value those people and say, we really admire and appreciate what you're doing, because we know you're putting yourself in the front line. You're putting yourself and your families potentially in danger to be in service of life.
It is. Can I ask you a question about that real quick? I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Did you want to finish your point, or?
Well, I was just going to make the point that, see, that appreciation and gratitude, do companies really appreciate their workforce? Do they really thank them? Because one of the things that the more I've studied, particularly the systemic work that I'm very, very interested in, is that we live and have lived, I think, in the last 30 or 40 years, both in the UK and the US, and especially in the US, I'd suggest, in a model that has tended to put shareholders first. You know, it's been a shareholder economy. And there's lots of talk and lots of dispute as to whether we should be a stakeholder economy rather than a shareholder economy. And so we have multiple stakeholders that we should please, or whether we should just please shareholders. And my challenge with this is that it becomes a left brain either or.
Right.
But the work I've done systemically and listening to people who've got a much deeper experience and understanding of systems than I have, what they always say in an organizational setting is that the most important stakeholder are your people. It's the workforce, and they should be put first. So in your decision making, everything supports the people. And I think that that just makes, you know, and I found that difficult, you know, as I've said, the first part of this call was about me spending kind of 16 years looking at why shareholders come first.
Yes.
And this is one of the loyalties I've had to leave behind and go, actually, no, shareholders don't come first.
But it's kind of mandated by law, though, isn't it? In a sense, the first, it's by law is to make profit, make sure they're making a profit.
But only if we think of all of these stakeholders as being separate and it being an either or mentality. Yeah. Because one of the best companies in the US in terms of share price performance from about 1972 to 2006 was Southwest Airlines.
Yes.
If you look at all their material, you look at their management methodology, they obey this thing. They say, we put our staff first. On the simple basis that if we really look after our people and really care about them, you know, this is values in action. See the difference here.
Yeah.
You know, we really look after our people. We really care about them. And we do. You know, it's not just a sort of thing that's on the notice board. It's behaviorally demonstrable that we put our people first.
Yes.
They will really look after our customers. Because if I really value you, and you were an employee of mine, and I really took care of you and made sure that everything was okay, and if you had a problem, you could, you know, but also, and I think a really key issue here, and I really kind of gave you a lot of autonomy in what you were doing and trusted you because, you know, I've hired you. I've got to give you autonomy because what was the point of hiring you if I don't give you autonomy?
Yeah.
And I also give you a sense of purpose. And then I say, right, these are the clients I want you to work with. How are you going to work with those clients?
Yeah, the human brain isn't going to, the way we interact, just to consider it at home or with other people. If you're being treated like that by somebody, it's hard not to bring that into the behavior of those that are around you after that time, after that incident. It's really difficult to take. So why would it be any different in business? It'd probably be actually worse because you don't have those same emotions and feelings of love and connection that you have with your friends and your family. So at work, it's probably going to show up even more so.
Yeah. And then the customers become really happy because they're being looked after.
Yep.
And being taken care of. What do? They keep coming back.
Yes.
And they recommend your service. You know, in Southwest Airlines case, they recommend friends and family. Then the planes are full.
Yes.
You know, well, from an economic perspective, airlines, you know, because I point this out to people, and I do this in strategy when I'm looking at strategy with companies, is that when Southwest Airlines was making all of this money for shareholders, the rest of the industry was in Chapter 11.
Really?
You know, the rest of the industry is a basket case. I mean, hence there's the quote from Warren Buffett that he's a member of AA, which is Airlines Anonymous, that whenever he thinks of buying an airline share, he phones a friend to talk him out of it. So that's the reputation of the industry. So the structural economics of the industry are not good. And yet, through this model, they've strategically created a very profitable and successful brand. And they've done it because they didn't do the same as the rest of their competitors. And this is an important point about strategy, and this could also be applied to you as an individual, is what makes us strategically competitive is our uniqueness. It's because we've got an economic model or an approach that is completely different from our peer group.
Oh, it's fine.
So Southwest Airlines, just to continue that point,
sure.
So they've started by looking after their people. They've looked after the customers keep coming back, the planes are full. You need the plane to be full to make money in an airline.
Yeah.
Because if you're flying from New York to Dallas, if there's 6 people on it or 306 people on it, your costs are the same.
Yeah. But your income is different.
But your income is completely different, isn't it?
Yes.
It's completely different. And so shareholders are happy.
So back to the American Airlines thing, it's neat as you were describing that the rest of the airline industry was in Chapter 11 not doing well, then a shambles in a sense. But here's Southwest Airlines pulling it out, doing good, making a profit. People are happy. People at the company are happy. Shareholders are happy. The people flying on their airlines are happy, and they're making a profit. The difference that was happening was the soft skills, the people skills. What we're talking about here, what you're talking about, is to say, to take the values and apply it in a way of how people really are, how they want to be, how they are. So I want to ask you this question in regard to that. When people are in the left brain and companies are making the left brain decisions, what's within that left brain decision, as best as you can tell, what's the fear of going over to the connection and love? From that perspective, from the left brain's perspective, what is it afraid of? Why won't it implement this? What's stopping corporations or individuals from being able to go over, knowing that connection is going to work in many different contexts, not just the profit motive, but other areas? From the view of the left brain, what do you think that is, Michael?
It's a really good question. I think, first and foremost, I think a lot of what we're talking about would be kind of, in certain organizations, would be deemed as too soft and too fluffy and not hard-edged enough. There's almost a sort of that left hemisphere wanting to be tough, wanting to be task-oriented rather than relationship-oriented. And I think this is a big, big challenge, because it's very easy to focus on the task at hand.
Yes.
It's in many ways kind of putting people first, coming from our values first, is in many ways much more difficult, yet it's perceived to be soft. And so I think a lot of people, have grown up in, and I would say this, I've done some work teaching MBAs, and they're incredibly bright and they're incredibly intelligent people, and yet they've been educated to be so analytical that being analytical is, of course, a left hemispheric strength. But what does analysis mean? What analysis means is we take things apart. We literally disaggregate things. We see things as parts, and hence your very legitimate question around, well, on a legal basis, we're supposed to put shareholders first, but that's because we've broken up in the stakeholders into individual parts. And we're seeing it, well, we either put shareholders first or we put these other stakeholders first. What I was careful to make clear is that there was a sequence of putting the people first, who put the customers first, who keep coming back. Because without that, you haven't got a business. And the shareholders have invested in that business. But if I could look after shareholders very easily in my left hemisphere by being ruthless and saying, right, I'm going to put shareholders first. Do you know what? We're spending, $1 billion a year on marketing, and I'm going to cut that to $300 million. So I've made 700 million extra profit, but I've destroyed my marketing.
Yeah.
So because what the left hemisphere tends to do is it doesn't tend to look longer term. And I think what we're being invited to do in this phase of reset at a corporate level is take longer term decisions for the good of our workforce, for the good of all the stakeholders. And if you want to, and again, this will be very, this will challenge some people, but also for the good of the environment.
Yeah.
Because that left hemisphere sort of wanting to grow, it's all about growth. Everyone in business talks about growth. Well, strictly speaking, growth is just one dimension of shareholder value. The other dimension of shareholder value that I just very simply talk about is what risk is involved in that growth. And so, whenever we hear a company talking about, well, I've grown the business by cutting my marketing spend, that's not growth.
Yeah, exactly.
What you're required to do, I think, as a leader in the business, is not necessarily to grow, it's to deepen your competitive advantage. What makes you a much more compelling proposition to your customer base is the key. So
Gotcha.
if it might include reducing costs, but it might be, actually, we're not going to take £1 billion from marketing. We're going to take 300 million from marketing, and we're going to reinvest it in innovation. Because in 2 years' time, this product range is going to tire. And so we need to really think about, that's making the business more competitive.
Yes. Research and development. Yeah.
So it's the R&D, it's the innovation, it's the creativity, all of which, of course, are right hemisphere activities. Because you can't have innovation and R&D unless you're prepared to fail. Because things go wrong with innovation. That's the point.
And that's not going to happen in the left hemisphere.
No, because and that's the key.
threat.
In a lot of organizations, what will happen is the left hemisphere will get frightened if there's too much innovation.
Really?
Well, because it may not see the results straight away.
Oh, short term versus long term there. So that's the systematic stuff that you're talking about. Like, okay, you can look at it this way, but if you're just taking it in a sense of what you were saying as a part, because you're breaking something apart, left brain, as opposed to the connecting part of the right brain, putting things together, that they're not seeing how these parts interact with other parts and that can shape them. How does that shape? Okay, yes, that makes sense left brain wise. If we're just looking very foveal vision at this and say that all makes sense, but we haven't considered what's outside of that in a bigger picture, so to speak, to say, yeah, but if you considered when you do that alone without considering this, how that's going to affect. And so from the fear perspective brain, we're looking at a bunch of smaller pictures without seeing how they interact with each other and how that interaction may give us something that we think is going to work great, because we're looking at a smaller picture that's detrimental on a bigger picture, to say you're not considering how this is hurting other things within the bigger picture.
Yeah, because it could work in the short term.
The short term. Okay. I like that time wise too, because you got time too, right?
You've got time.
Yeah.
And we then have to start saying that you get the behaviors that you reward in organizations. So if I set a target that's a 2-year target, I could have the whole main board working out how to deliver cost reductions and to do a share buyback so they can hit their earnings target in 2 years' time. And then they leave because they've made their money. So I then come in as a new CEO and I see that the marketing budget's been cut, that some real skills have been lost in the organization because we've got rid of key people who really understood what was going on, who had really good relationships with clients, but they were got rid of because they were expensive, in inverted commas. Well, they were expensive because they were adding a lot of value.
You just brought something that really clicked for me right there, and that's the sense of that the organization could be close to working good and maybe needs a few tweaks here and there, but when you bring somebody in from the outside, the corporate, I don't know if I'm saying the right rater or somebody that can come
Yeah,
in there and just say, we're looking to do this, that the whole system values that we're talking about, they don't have the long-term value. They're saying, I'm going in there for 2 years, I'm going to make as much money as I can and as much shaking and rattling of papers or whatever, and make it look a certain way, and then I'm out of there in 2 years and I'm going to leave. They're not looking again over long term. So we're hiring people, CEOs and C-suite people, that are very short-term minded, that don't have the interconnection of how this will affect the next guy that comes when I leave in 2 years,
yeah,
or the company, or everybody in the company. So they take it out, make it a skeleton of what it was, all the creative aspects that you're talking about, because they look too expensive, not to figure out even a bigger system. How can we make those things work even better for the company? So it's individuals that can come in at the high level of C-suite that can really hurt everything below it, just because they have that non-value system, I should say, or their own personal value system that doesn't
yeah.
integrate with the company.
No, and it's a mismatch, and the distinction I make is there's a big difference between extracting value and creating value. So I can extract value by cutting the costs, getting rid of the workforce, getting profits up in the short term, bringing a lot of debt onto the balance sheet to retire some of the equity. All of those, the sort of financial engineering, if you will, that nominally or theoretically creates value, but it's more extractive. Creating value, as I say, is deepening your competitive position. That's creating value. It's the innovation that leads to a new product or a new way of relating to your customers. That's creating value. And I think we do have a situation where I think a lot of organizations are looking to extract value. It's almost like, and we saw that, I think it was a Canadian company called Valiant that sells pharmaceuticals in the United States, and they have this policy of acquiring pharmaceutical companies, cutting costs, cutting out the research budget, and then price gouging the pharmaceutical.
Oh,
and eventually it went bust. And that's a really good example of, because, all it was looking to do was extract value. Or if you like, to make money. And this is a big question. I think making money is really important, because money then allows you to invest in the creativity. It allows you to invest in R&D. It allows you to pay people properly. So I'm not saying money is not important, but it's a means value. It's not an ends value. And it's really about, from a leadership perspective, are we creating something that people really want to buy? As an organization, what do we exist for? Would our clients really miss us if we'd gone? If we closed tomorrow, would we be really missed? And I appreciate those are sort of fairly existential questions, but if you like, in the NLP sense, the neurological levels, we're just using that. Because if the company's got an issue at the level of values, it may be that the company doesn't know who it is at an identity level.
Yes.
Or it might have lost sight of its purpose. What's its purpose as an organization? And again, these are the things that I think, and I know that Larry Fink at BlackRock has written to a lot of, one of the largest investors in the world, if not the largest, I think, these days, has written to companies saying we are interested in purpose. So we're starting to get the investment community talking about purpose.
Oh, that's good news. That's
and I
good
think
news.
that And I think it is really good news because it means we can start having a conversation about creating value rather than extracting it. And we can start talking about, well, and how do we do that? And there is this wonderful paradox, is that by putting the people, your workforce, and the people who work for you first, shareholders are the ones that benefit. It's not an either or.
That's really a good frame. And that should be your book title, Creating Value versus Extracting Value, unless there's something out there ready for it. But if that was the frame, it would change everything. So, I mean, the frame is to consider to say, and then what do those two things mean? If you extract value, what does it mean? And, it occurred to me that when you were saying that about like the company Valiant, was it? Or Valiant, the Canadian company, we hear about what the company did and we look at it through as the company, but we don't know how many executives went in there, got their 2 years and got out of there and got out of there pretty rich. But we just see this company that's left as a skeleton and just it doesn't survive because of it, or is having a hard time surviving. We don't see that because we don't see the inner workings of the extracting people that go in there and extract the value, and then we have an impression of the company without really us seeing what that culture was, or who were the vultures that went in there to take the company out, to try to use the value system. I don't know if I'm making any sense to you at all with what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's complete sense. And it's a bit like, when I was talking about the health workers who are going back in to work at the front line of this crisis, often on very low or minimum wage, and everybody quite rightly is now saying they're the heroes. That's because the work has meaning and purpose, and it really matters. And these people are motivated. They're not motivated by the money, because if you were motivated by the money, you wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
Whereas we seem to be saying that board level executives, unless their bonus is $5 million, they're not prepared to get out of bed. And so there's this sort of greed that has infected the corporate ethos at certain levels with certain individuals, which is systemic. It's just part of the system that we're in. We think, well, this is what you do, is you go in and you work for 3 years and you make as much as you can and you get out. But I think it's part of that sort of meme almost of extracting value. This is how businesses are run. Shareholders are better off if we cut costs. No, shareholders are better off if you create a better business. That may include cutting costs, but it may include a lot of other things that actually maintain and enhance your competitive strategy, your competitive position.
Additive
of
things.
Which, yeah, but cost is an element of that, but it's not the only element. I mean, if you look at Steve Jobs when he went back to Apple, that was 90 days away from Chapter 11 when he went back there.
Really, Apple's that close?
It was that close. But he had to reorganize and he had to cut costs. But what did he really do? He innovated.
He sure did. He sure did.
It's
$1 trillion company.
It's $1 trillion company. I think, and people can look at this, I think in 96 or 97 when he went back, I think it was about 10 billion. It was capitalized at $10 billion. Wow. That's value creation. So whatever they paid him, I don't care.
Good point.
So I'm not against people earning this money from creating value.
Yeah, that's
but
really
from
well
extracting
said.
I'm not being funny. I used to work closely with who was a corporate client, a finance director, or a CFO, as you would call them, I think. And he always used to say to me, Michael, cutting costs is the noddy stuff. Any fool can cut costs. Cutting costs and creating value and growing the business, that's what we're paid for.
I like that.
So again, it's, and I think, and it's not that all businesses do this, by the way. There's some people doing great things. The classic case in the UK is an organization called Unilever. They had a number of years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, they had a new CEO called Paul Polman. And prior to his arrival, it's a good company with good brands, and it had got a reputation for being quite bureaucratic and a bit slow, because it become a bit like a sort of, it used to be known as a bit like the civil service. It was almost like a public sector organization, because you had a job for life, and, it was a big company. And what, in the context of this conversation, what was really interesting about what Polman did, one of the first things he did was to get rid of quarterly reporting.
Interesting.
Because, for all the reasons we've discussed, what does it matter of what we make in the next quarter? I know the next 2 years might be painful because I've got to take decisions that improve the long-term health and vitality of this organization. So if I'm focusing on what we're doing every quarter, it's the wrong focus.
Yet the shiny dangling quarter thing is so ingrained in people that it's hard, unless you pull it completely, hard to leave it in there and say, we're going to not pay so much attention to this. It's like, yeah, right. Let's see how good that works. It's just not going to happen. That's a brilliant move.
So he did that, but then possibly even better than that is he then reconnected with the founding purpose of Unilever. When we were set up, what is it that drove the business? What did the founders want to drive the business? And what was its founding purpose? And this is brilliantly appropriate in the current environment, because, of course, the Lever brothers started out as soap manufacturers.
Yes.
And they started out as soap manufacturers a bit like today, when washing your hands could save your life.
Yeah. Yes.
So their purpose was bringing cleanliness to the masses. But I can see from your reaction, that's a big purpose.
Yeah, it is. It wouldn't normally be. Right now, it has there's some extra strength,
Exactly,
pun intended, to that cleaning metaphor right now of yeah.
But imagine this in the 1860s, 1870s, whenever they started. This was profoundly important to them. So, of course, by tapping into that, you start realizing, actually, this is a big job. This is really important, what we're doing. Now, I'm not saying that founding energy doesn't need updating, but just realizing that was the spirit and energy in which you were set up allows you to start saying, well, what's our purpose today? How can we honor the founders by having a purpose that will unleash meaning in the organization, that will get people working because they are in service of something bigger than themselves?
Yeah. Now that goes back to who they are, they're being again. It starts to say that the company is being, and that translates or transfers to the employees that they're allowed to be as well.
Yeah. And if you look after the employees again, they've got that sense of purpose. We're not looking at quarterly earnings. We can start building something that matters. And the share price has been a massive money maker in the last 10 years. So can you see this point that by having a sense of purpose, by eliminating targets, quarterly targets especially, by putting people first, this is not in opposition to shareholders. This is actually creating a great business with a value-added proposition that makes money for shareholders. So it's not a binary dichotomy of, well, if we have purpose, that means as shareholders I'm getting less money. No, as if you've got a great purpose and you can connect to a great purpose, it's creating a proposition that will benefit you, the shareholder,
As well, as
as well.
well, because it's an inclusive purpose,
Yes.
which means
Well, and
it's not going to seek to take out or to dismantle something or to say let's let this amount of marketing go, $1 billion, we'll just cut that. No, it's considering how does that still be inclusive? How do we continue on there, and how do we maybe repurpose it, or what you were saying, maybe we can change elements of it or not maybe cut it as much. It doesn't have to be that either or dichotomy that you're talking about. It can be a range, maybe a little bit of this, like more like cooking, a little bit of this, a pinch of that, and to make something that is a purposeful, inclusive corporation. And I don't mean inclusive of having to be everything, but things that make it work and run in the original purpose of what
yeah,
Unilever is about, or the Lever brothers were about.
yeah. And then, of course, and that's a brilliant way of putting it, because once we start being more inclusive, we can start including more. And we can start including the environment. What's our impact on the environment?
Yes. Yeah.
Because there is a price to pay for that.
Yes.
If we, because if you start treating your people well, I think it's a lot easier to start thinking about, well, we also need to treat
The
the
surrounding
environment we're
area.
in
Yeah, exactly. The air, the
well.
land, everything.
The air,
Yeah.
the land. We can't go around. We can't have this purpose about cleanliness or what have you, if we then start polluting rivers.
Exactly. Killing fish,
So
destroying farmers. Yeah. I got it.
but then that whole corporate governance thing just becomes a matter of inclusion.
Well, let me ask you this, Michael. If so you got a company, you start to include these new values in there and just say, hey, we can do that, but we can do this too, and we can still make the money and the profit, still have that motive, and actually your chances of making profit are going to be more. How, let's say somebody that during a quarter or a certain period of time, maybe something happens where they end up losing money. How do you keep that installed and going, even though maybe it's not looking as good as they thought, that the left brain starts to engage a little bit? How do you keep that going? And I don't know if you have the answer for that, but what's your thoughts on that?
No, well, my thoughts are that it's a great question, because what tends to happen is people can lose the faith, as it were, if you get a couple of bad quarters. And then what will happen is a more traditional CEO who's good on the cost cutting gets brought in a year later.
Gotcha.
And so you lose the initiative if you let that happen. The key is for the purpose and the strategy and how you're investing in that purpose and how you're communicating it and the long-term nature of it has to be sufficiently compelling to say that some people go, oh, this is the first quarter. I don't like these results. I'm going to sell my shares. But other people go, this is such a compelling long-term story.
So you've included that. So you've actually included the resistance that may come along within the purposeful model, so that when that comes, that's a natural to go, well, we're going to stay on. We knew this was going to happen.
Well, it's even better then, isn't it? Because you then have shareholders who agree with your vision and strategy rather than those that didn't. So your shareholder list, as we call it, comprises of people who believe in what you're doing. Because there will always people who say, this is just, nonsense, and, or, anything could go wrong in the next 12 months. And that's true. This is all about risk. I'm not, especially, you can't, in the current situation, we've got the stock market down almost 30% in the first quarter of the year. We've got businesses with no revenues. Risk is a big part of the investment landscape.
But what is the
And
risk if they don't apply this, Michael? If they don't
that's
apply that, what's the risk? That's where I think we're at the crux of the matter is it's you can change it, and yes, there's risk but if you don't start applying the integration of employees and the whole system and looking at it a different way with purpose, it seems to me it's an even bigger risk.
I would agree with that. And I think that's why people like Larry Fink, head of BlackRock, are suddenly writing to companies saying, we're including purpose as part of our evaluation of company appraisals, and that will determine our investment in you or not. And so, this is a kind of a new area, and I think we're all trying to adjust to it. And I've just been trying to show that, the either or thinking is not going to serve us. It never has. It's in coaching, we would say that two's a dilemma, three's choice. You never, ever would put a coaching client with two options.
Yeah.
Why would you? It creates a dilemma.
Yeah.
What state do we go into in a dilemma? Not a very good one. Because we then tend to oscillate. Oh, I'll do this. And then you think the next day, oh shit, I'm not so sure about it. Now I'll do the other one. So we then have this oscillation. Either or thinking creates that dilemma.
Who handles the dilemma really good? The left brain. Exactly. The left brain says, I know how to do this.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I just need to choose one. If we're talking about risk reward as the heart of investment, the risks of that dilemma are too great. So what we need to do is create more choices, which is where I think coaching and organizational decision making need to join, because you'd never let a coaching client take a decision with a dilemma of two. Yeah. You would expand the possibilities, however you might do it. And there's all sorts of coaching techniques to put people into a situation where they've got a whole host of choices other than the choices that they thought they originally had. So moving beyond the dilemma, and I think your question is great, that there will be resistance along the way that has to be acknowledged and included. And if the results aren't good in the first quarter, a short-term investor will sell. But if you've led in such a way that you've got a compelling purpose, that your values are aligned, and your proposition makes sense, then people will back you. Back in 2004-5, when you start looking at Apple, you just knew they were going to make money for you. If they had a bad quarter, I suspect Steve Jobs didn't even care what his quarterly figures were, because he was too busy thinking, how can this product be better, more beautiful, more effective? How will our consumers respond to this? But you see, he's not focusing on shareholders. He's focusing on what will make a great product for our customers.
So you said something that you said at the beginning of the call. You just said it again about Steve Jobs, the thinking, but you're not talking about the same type of thinking. You're talking about a different type of thinking. Can you make a distinction between the thinking that you're talking about? Because when you say, if I remember right, with your job, you started, people start doing more, but then they have less thinking. And you said that was one of the reasons that you felt like after 16 years that you didn't have a thing. But it's not just thinking, it's a certain type of thinking. When Steve Jobs, you said he was doing thinking, he couldn't think about the quarters because his thinking. What thinking are you talking about?
Well, he's using his right hemisphere because he's very creative and he's very innovative, and he's not getting, because had he have come into Apple in 96, 97 when they were in trouble with a left hemisphere mindset, I suspect the business could have closed or been dismembered. But he knew that innovation was the way out. It's very much a right hemisphere mindset. So what does the right hemisphere have to offer? Yeah. What the right hemisphere has is the creativity. So the right hemisphere is creative. The left hemisphere is linear, either or, down the line. But he has that right hemisphere. Well, let's look at all the options. Let's look at all the choices here. What are all the ways we can build this brand, including cutting costs? That's very different than we have to cut costs.
Mm.
So what he did was he increased marketing spend and I increased R&D,
Yes.
cut costs in other areas.
Yeah.
Because in saying all I've been saying, I'm not against targets, I'm not against cost cutting, but they are a small part and need to be put in context. And you're right to pick me up on the thinking. The thinking needs to be generative. The thinking needs to be fresh.
Yes.
As you know, in coaching, the Time to Think coaching I do with Nancy Klein, she has a beautiful question. What is your freshest thinking now? I.e., I don't want to hear all of your tired left hemisphere stuff that, is effectively commentary. It's not thinking.
Yes.
But when we're talking about thinking in the context of, say, a Steve Jobs or somebody trying to do something new, it's generative. Or if you like, it's coherent thinking. And by coherent in this context, I mean, it's thinking informed by being in a great state, a flow state, where I'm drawing on both hemispheres, my heart brain and my gut brain.
As once you told me that and I can't remember who the two fellows were, but the difference between debate versus dialogue.
Yeah.
How you just either or debate, it's left or right, and you're going to debate about that, or dialogue to be able to have fresh new thinking now. What is your newest thinking now, freshest thinking now, that then creates a dialogue? Because the frame is there's not going to be an exclusion. It's inclusive. Let's figure out how we're going to bring new ideas in fresh.
Yes. And if you think about values in that sense, the key point in a debate is nobody listens. In a debate, I wait my turn to speak. I don't listen to you. I'm just rehearsing my arguments, or waiting for you to make an error where I can pounce in, rather than really sitting and listening and being incredibly interested as to where your thinking is going next, and not interrupting you, but giving you high quality attention that will allow you to think at your best. That's dialogue.
Yeah.
Because dialogue is almost like, it's not speaking, it's thinking together. It's not speaking together, it's thinking together. So it's me supporting you in your thinking, knowing that when you finished, you'll say, Michael, that's my freshest thinking now. Where are you at? And then you don't interrupt me. You just let me go, because you're listening with a spirit of inquiry. You're not listening to close me down. You're not listening to debate with me. And I think it's a great point, because I think in a lot of organizations, they don't have quality thinking because the engagements are taking place in a spirit of debate, not dialogue.
And you said something in that regard with the dialogue about being able to retain the information. And I know one of the things you've talked about in the past with me is that it is the cost of retaining an employee. But if you're including the right brain, like that poor fellow that ended up breaking down in the boardroom, if he was able to be inclusive and have his right brain there and his feelings, and have the love of the organization, this model that you're talking about, how much more do you think it helps a company retain its employees?
Oh, I think it's huge. And I also think, from what I gather, that a lot of the younger generations want to work in organizations where they are valued, that do have a sense of purpose, that whatever our generation thinks of in terms of the environment, the younger generation really get it. And it's great that they really get it. So I think that in many ways, it's like, I can't remember, I think it was Buckminster Fuller said that in terms of the universe, our children are our elders, because the whole universe has gone before them. And I think that actually rings true here, because I think a lot of, the younger generations instinctively know that business should be doing a lot better than it's doing, that it should have a sense of purpose, that it should look after people, and that there's a very different way of doing things. And I think that's why this is an interesting juncture, as you say.
Mm.
What's the risk of not benefiting and reorganizing your business now, the risk of doing it in the same old way? And the left hemisphere will want to do the same old way because it's familiar.
Familiar. Got it.
I'm not under any illusion that when this is all over, there'll be lots of folk who will want to go back to the old way.
Well, it's back to uncertainty again, then, isn't it?
Yeah,
Doing.
and the uncertainty is massive. But in terms of uncertainty, I think if you can be present to the uncertainty and you can be confident with the uncertainty as a leader, then you'll take much better decisions. And I think you can be confident with the uncertainty if you've got real clarity around your values and conviction around your purpose. Because that will give you, as it were, the North Star by which to navigate.
Transcending time. It's
yeah, is that because the uncertainty will always be there.
Yeah.
But there will be certain eternal values of the organization or a purpose, or being in service of the community that you are in business with. Because business should be in service, just as in the same way that these people in the health service are coming back to the front line and volunteering to come back to the front line, notwithstanding the risks they're facing. They know what to do.
Yes.
There's this whole field of uncertainty, but they know what to do because they feel it.
Yes.
And I think the younger generation will get this about organizations, or which organizations are really looking to genuinely be in the service of life, in the service of their customers, in the service of society in a broader context. And I know a lot of people listening will think this is very idealistic, and in many ways it is, but I'm intrigued that there are companies like Southwest Airlines, like Unilever, and many, many others that we haven't mentioned, Patagonia, organizations like that, that live this and are very successful living it.
Yeah. Yeah. There just seems to be a magic to it. And what I like about listening and talking to you in regard to this is that when you talk about it, I don't feel excluded. I feel like there's something innate inside of me that is able to participate in this because it has a stake in it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the inclusion of all stakeholders.
That's it, including those that aren't actual financial stakeholders, the community, the local community and everything. What is their stake in it that we haven't maybe not considered up to this point?
Yeah. And local, the local population will have a big stake, in terms of whether there be pollution or things like that, or, the infrastructure requirements of the business and what have you. And yes, the financial stakeholders are really important, because without the finance, the business could not be conducted.
Yes.
So in all of this, I'm not trying to say they're not important. I'm just trying to suggest that we need to put the order in a slightly different way. So as a shareholder, you're in support of what the company is doing.
Yes.
And you will make money that way. But if I set out just to make money for shareholders, it's a very narrow, non-inclusive brief. And the danger and the risk, as we've been saying, is that, I think shareholders would like it if this year's profits went up when we're having a really difficult year. So let's cut the marketing budget. That factory, why don't we close it and sell the site? Yeah, and this has gone on.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
These things,
many times.
These things go on. And in terms of targets, there's a great saying by Warren Buffett, who says that any company that is committed to making the numbers will one day make up the numbers.
Wow. Say that again, Michael. That's really, but any company that's committed to the numbers will one day make up
to
the
making
numbers.
the numbers will one day make up the numbers.
Wow.
I.e., there will be fraud or accounting, loose accounting interpretation, shall we say, to make sure we hit the numbers. Enron, WorldCom, they all fiddle the numbers one way or another.
And it seems to invite other things in
And now they
that's
no longer
inclusive.
exist, of course.
Yeah, they no longer exist because they included things that were from a negative place that then seemed to get more into the left brain and actually take the company apart instead of bringing it together.
I think that's an interesting point, because I think that the danger, and I haven't thought about it in quite this way before, but the danger with having problems and having goals and targets is that you then end up in a problem frame thing, a problem frame mindset.
Yes.
How do we hit the goal?
Mm.
And then that narrows the thinking down, because we then try to move away from that problem. But creativity doesn't work on the problem. Creativity works on a solution.
Mm. Wow. Well, we've been here for a long time, Michael. Let me ask you this and thank you for your time and this wonderful insights and knowledge that goes with it. What somebody listening here that maybe has a small company, medium-sized company, doesn't have a big corporation, during this
Mhm.
period of time that we're going through here, any suggestions, the things that they may kind of put a more of a primary focus on as they get ready to gear back up to get when the economy starts gearing back up and that they can integrate well into it, things that will help them along the way that from what they've listened to, from what you're saying, to say, okay, just kind of concentrate on these couple things or frameworks that it's going to help your business one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I appreciate, particularly for small businesses in this environment, this is really risky and really challenging, because the hit to revenues is so massive. And I think that there's also this huge uncertainty of the duration of the period we're in. You know, if we could say it was 3 months, that's one thing. It could be 6, it could be 9, it could be 12. So I really appreciate what I'm about to say. You'll be all in different contexts, different time frames, and different financial positions. You know, those of you
Yes.
with reserves will find what I'm about to say a lot easier. But almost like the Unilever example, is this a time for you to maintain relationships with your customer base and maintain relationships with your key employees so that they feel valued? You know, and I appreciate the financial side. We'll perhaps come to that in a moment. But the key to me would be is this up in.
Say that
What
again.
we
You kind of broke up again when you're saying that. No, the screen did, so it was video. But you said the key is, and then it it broke up, and I could see you finish there. So if you would repeat that, please.
what was the founding energy you set your business up in? What, you know, really got you out of bed in the morning to say, actually, I really want to build this business? Because I think staying in that energy of what you want to create, what you want to build, is going to be really important over the coming months when it's so difficult and challenging. So retaining the energy of what you wanted to build and create. So, what are the values you would like to live in the business?
Mm.
What's the purpose of the business? Has the purpose changed since you set it up? You know, you might want to refine it, because there'll be lots of new opportunities that come along from this, as well as new threats. So revisiting the founding purpose, I think, is imperative, because you need to update it, and you need to really appreciate what is it that you add value in doing. You know, what is it that your customers are prepared to pay for? You know, what is it that makes you competitive? Because I think, again, I think the whole of this has really been about what enables your business to add value that customers will buy from you.
Mm.
And I think refining that and getting very clear on what it is that you do, because it may be in doing that, you start realizing, well, actually, there's part of this business that's actually a reasonable part of the business that we no longer need.
It's changed.
It's changed because the value added is really here. And so there'll be some key decisions, and so just kind of, really being in a great state when you take those decisions, thinking in terms of, the the outcome and what you want to create, rather than creating dilemmas for yourselves, as we've been discussing. So what are the creative possibilities? And I appreciate that this is challenging, but I think it really is, I think, a great time to revisit how your business can be different. It may be, I was talking to one business yesterday, and what we were talking with them about is that they found that all of their team meetings are now being done over Microsoft
Zoom.
Teams.
Oh, Teams. Yeah.
Yeah, or Zoom. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. But the corollary of that is it's much easier for their staff to work from home.
Mm.
So they've always felt it was key to have a big head office with a lot of square footage. Clearly,
That's changing.
that's changing. So there'll be ways of doing things that are completely different, but still preserve the value. And I think it's just really worth spending time thinking about what are the key elements that drive value. And also just try and think about what would it be like if we put the employees first, and if we really trusted them and we really allowed them to input into decision making. Because one of the key things that that Southwest Airlines represents and many other great organizations represent, that if you put your staff first, you've also got to allow them to take decisions. You've got to decentralize decision making, because at the center, you don't always have the information. Now, that'd be different in a small business. You'll be very close to what's happening and what's going on. I get that. But again, there'll be people with great ideas who work for you, and just making sure that you hear them and they're an input into the dialogue process.
Mm.
And of course, it makes them feel valued. But that decentralization is important, because if you think about it linguistically, if you don't decentralize decision making, you can't transform the business. Because if you keep decision making centralized, people will conform with what you want. So there's a big decision to me as to whether you want people to conform, and you might be at a stage where that's relevant. But if you want to transform, and I think that the universe is telling us at the moment that we need, all of us need to transform, what can you decentralize? Or, who are the people that you can ask to support you in what needs to be done to create a compelling strategy and a compelling proposition that really people feel compelled to buy at the end of this process?
And then the energy that's in there, that's really good. The energy that's in there from all levels kind of transmits out to the product or the service that you have, and people can feel that there's not a incongruent feeling that they might have, that something's not right in there, that it comes with a force of congruence, because you are congruent on so many different levels.
Yeah. And if you like, coming back to that word, and you may or may not like that in your business, but if everything's being done from the energy and place of love rather than fear, what difference will that make to your organization? I would suggest that's also transformative. And your clients will just pick that up.
Mm.
They will know when they're dealing with you, or they're dealing with your employees, or they're dealing with your product, they will just feel it. And I appreciate some of you, this may be going too far, but I think, Mark, you're right, to focus on that energetic dimension, that's what we're dealing with. And I think and people, I think, increasingly, either want transactions done brilliantly, like Amazon, or in a lot of small businesses, they want relationship.
Yes.
And that relationship, if it's coming from that energy of love, that energy of positivity, that energy of wanting to be in service, it's a much more compelling offering.
Yes. And I think everybody, years ago, somebody once told me, said, all human beings have these built-in lie detectors in them, and they may not be able to consciously tell you the reason, but they can feel it. It doesn't matter. They can feel it. And so that's where I get the whole energetic and the feeling aspect of it. Is people are geniuses. It's built in. It's innate to be able to figure that out. And they may not be say, well, this issue has bothered me. Let me ask you some more questions. They just might go, this doesn't feel good. I'm leaving, and I'm not going to buy. So it doesn't matter what it is, you've still lost the sale. It doesn't matter. So if we trust and look at every human being that they have this ability, and we're congruent in the message and what we want going out there from as far as purpose, as you were saying earlier, they'll feel that. They'll know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is all energy.
Yeah.
A bit like the previous call, talking about words as packets of energy.
Yeah.
We're still in this field that's an energetic field, and people, you're right, people pick this up, and people you work for will pick this up. And as a business leader, you're responsible for the field you're creating, for the energy you're transmitting, and that's why we all have to do work on ourselves.
Yeah. Now, I like this, and I like doing this with you because to me, it's and I talked to John Overdurf and John Burton, Dr. Burton. It was about how we do this individually, and then I'm thinking, what's really the part with you, with Michael, is that how does this transfer to a business? Because we're all going to go back to work. This machine is going to gear back up again, but right now, while it's paused, it might be time to do some preventative maintenance along the way.
Yeah.
When the military, we were, whether a vehicle was good or bad, it didn't matter if something was wrong, that we did preventive maintenance every week, every 2 weeks, every month, every 3 months. There was a schedule. We did it, whether it was good or bad. We just did it because we didn't want it to happen out on the field. If we were in battle, we didn't want any issues to happen, and we relied on that.
Yeah.
And that seems like basically we're saying now what would be a good way to, when this powers back up in businesses and how that interacts together. And I think that this situation is causing people to really take a look, and they're not wanting the disinformation and the lies. They want it straight. They want truth. I think truth is going to be a huge paradigm. And I think at the center of what we're talking about is how do we incorporate the truth of who we are into
Yes.
business, and what to small or large, up to massive international corporations. It's about the truth right now. We want the truth.
Yeah.
What's really happening? What's going on? Enough of the lies, enough of the propaganda. Let's at least have it on a level where if we start at this level, that permeates out and becomes inclusive worldwide. So I love the model, and I love how you talk about it. And I think that the first two calls and this call go so beautifully together, and that you actually went through and you listened to the first two calls and were able to bring it into this call. I love it, Michael. I love it. So is there anything else that I haven't talked about or said I would talk about that you yourself want to talk about?
No, I think that's good for now. We've covered a lot of ground.
Good. Whew, I feel better now. That's good. And so, Michael,
well, and hopefully it's useful. Hopefully it's useful, because I think it's,
know that.
And I hope that that genuinely a number of you have found some of these ideas kicking against what you believe, and you're resistant to them, because that's a sign that I'm doing a job.
Yeah, might be they need to take a good look at it again too, and you've kind of stirred that up.
And I think that's important, even if it is to disagree with me, as long as we, in the spirit of dialogue, because I genuinely don't care if people agree or not. I'm completely non-attached to that. But these are important ways, I think, of looking at business and what enables businesses to thrive.
Mm-hmm. So if people want to get a hold of you for their business or personally, to say, hey, maybe you want to go a little bit deeper in this and hire you, how would they get a hold of you? And I'll print this when we're doing editing. I'll print it on the screen. So why don't you go ahead and give it right now, how the best way to get a hold of you from the general public?
The best way to get a hold of me is through email, and it's Michael, lowercase, at marketmatters.co.uk.
Cool. And I will put that. I'll put that up for you there. And your website is
the same, marketmatters.co.uk.
Okay. Without the Michael there. Michael, this has been a pleasure. It's so good to see you, my friend. And you've given so much and shared so much. I really love this, and love the time I've spent with you, and love you, and think this is just a great gift you've given. So thank you very much. I'm sure my audience feels the same way.
I hope so. I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope they find it useful. And as ever, Mark, it's a real pleasure. It's just great because we can do it so conversationally, it makes it a lot easier and I think a lot richer as a result. So thank you.
Yeah, you're entirely welcome. My pleasure, Michael, and love to have you back on again. And I will put Michael's stuff at the end of this video as well about how his website and how to get a hold of him through his email. So look forward to seeing you again, Michael, and hopefully we see each other in Madison, Georgia this summertime at John over there.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers
Fingers crossed.
crossed. All right. Take
All
care,
right.
Michael. Thanks again.
All the best.
Yep.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Thanks. That was great.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Cheers now. Bye
Cheers.
bye.